Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Craig Spencer with another episode of Witch the Pot. As you can see, I have got an extra special magical guest with me today, Fio Gede Parma. Hi Fio, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Hi, Craig. Lovely to be here with you across the planet.
I know, I think you're going to be the furthest away guest that I ever have, and I really love that so much. Different hemispheres, and I really love how the internet can connect people, which is segueing me into if you would like to acknowledge country, then we know a bit more about where you are.
Yeah. So I'm in Gadigal and Bidjigal country, and this is really close. Where I live is 15 minutes walk from the Pacific Ocean, which to me is in the east. And I live very, very close from this to the site of the original invasion of the British into this continent, which is something I think about a lot and sometimes can even see kind of ghost ships when I'm showering through the window. So I acknowledge the elders of those people who still exist in the face of colonization, and I acknowledge their sciences and their ways of learning and listening and government and kinship and ceremony that still exist. And I acknowledge their sovereignty here. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I should have said, although I think it's pretty obvious when we heard that, and for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, that is acknowledging land. I know in the Southern Hemisphere, it's acknowledging country.
Mhm.
So a slight difference in vocabulary, but the same message applies. And I think it's very beautiful and it's very important to acknowledge. So thank you for that. For those people who have been God knows where in the magical community. Could you please tell us who you are? I know that I think most people have heard of you by now in the magical community, but still there could be people who are
Yeah,
new, stumbling across you for the first time.
totally. Yeah, I'm Fio Gede Parma, and I live in so-called Australia, where I grew up. I'm in my mid 30s. I was born in Bali, and I was born into a spirit working family, which I guess we would call like culturally Balinese Hindu. And so I grew up with polytheism and animism and mediumship and transpossession, all very central to my life. And I realized I was a witch when I was 11 years old. And then I dedicated myself to that very quickly because I'm just an all or nothing person. And I have been doing that ever since then. And I also write books. I had my seventh book come out in August in 2023 through Llewellyn Worldwide. And I teach and I mentor and I do a lot of reading for people and kind of like traditional like cunning craft. I just deal with people's lives. So my main profession is that I'm mentoring witches and spirit workers, or that I'm like dealing with non-witches and helping them kind of navigate their lives through divination or through spellcraft and other forms of magic. So that's a little about me.
I love that. Obviously, we're talking a bit more about your book from 2023 later, your seventh book. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Um, there were so many things in that that I think really made clear everything that you've just said about yourself. I think that sometimes when people write, writing can be quite stale. I think
Mhm.
not always, of course. There's
Mhm.
great books. There's some bad books out there, but I think with your book, you can definitely tell it's someone who lives what they practice, what they preach, what they write, what they teach. You can tell it's a life lived magically, which I'm so excited to talk about that book later. For now, though, I wanted to actually ask you about the cultures that you grew up with. You mentioned that they're quite magical backgrounds,
Mm.
Balinese Hindu. Have they had any influence on the way that you practice your craft today?
Yeah, like yes, absolutely. And I also, because Balinese Hinduism is a whole distinct being, tradition, culture. I also don't I like to remember that, and I like to honor that on its own. Like Balinese Hinduism is very intricate, very complex. It's it's kind of like in some ways a frozen in time form of tantric Hinduism because it came over into the Indonesian islands in like the I think scholars say something like the fifth, maybe the fifth century, and then most of the Indonesian archipelago was at that time different forms of Hindu empire or kingdoms or queendoms, in fact. And then when the Muslim Arabic traders came through, there were sultanates that came about, and a lot of the story is that in the like 10th and 11th century, a lot of the Javanese, I guess, intelligentsia and artisans and culture holders of Hindu empires and Hindu courts kind of fled to Bali. Interestingly, Bali is the only island in all of the Indonesian archipelago of something like 13,000 islands that is still Hindu. The rest of the islands are majority Muslim generally, some are Christian. Um, and then, so Bali is an interesting situation because it exists between two majority Muslim islands. Um, and its culture is deeply, deeply specific. Um, Definitely the mediumship and the trance possession parts of how I grew up deeply affect how I teach trance possession and how I think of it. Um, I was never trained in any formal way of drawing down the moon. That's not a part of anything that happened in my induction into the craft, but certainly I've studied all manner of things, and but I have my own ways of inducing people into trance possession um, that I pass on. So that deeply affects me, and I guess the dream work and I guess also just like the general like we would now call it animism, but like the general understanding that everything is sensuously alive, interrelated. Um, Everything is a spirit, everything is talking or singing or relating to everything else. And that ceremony and ritual and the ancestors and the spirits of the land are all very daily, like that's daily cultivated relationship. So that also affects how I think about those things and how I like talk about and maybe guide others in like daily practice. Certainly that affects how I do that for sure.
I love that. I know that. Thank you for the history as well, because I wasn't aware of, like you said, like how the Muslim majority islands surrounding Bali. I
Mhm.
wasn't aware of that, so thank you for that bit of information as well. I really appreciate what you're saying about other cultures and about them being their separate thing. I think
Mhm.
that's sometimes something that, particularly very Western
Mhm.
minds have still that very colonialist, oh, I can just step into a
Yeah,
space, pull from it, weave it in.
yeah,
And I think it's important to acknowledge, yes, these cultures are things on their own and
yeah,
they deserve that respect.
totally. Yeah, and I think
Um,
also like the
yeah,
colonialist mindset, it's very it lacks context sometimes. So it's like not always respecting the context of things. Like for instance, chakras obviously ever since I guess theosophy maybe and maybe a little earlier than that has been like very much adopted into various Western forms of magic, and in some ways very respectfully, in other ways not so respectfully. And in some ways it can be related to other things in Western or European systems of energy, I guess. But it's I think it's always important to remember that there are many, for instance, in specifically with chakras, there are so many forms of chakra meditation. There are so many. There's like the seven chakra system that is often spoken of in the West is only one. It's one form, and I think a lot of people don't consider that, for instance. And I think that's just one example of how we can open our minds and respect different cultures and consider maybe there's more going on than we think.
yeah, that's so true. I mean, I was particularly proud here. The next town over from me, they had less than a year ago a rebrand of their logo. They're called the Wigan Warriors, and they have changed. They had a centurion on their logo for a long, long time. Um, and then the question was sort of brought up, well, what actually is land. We're not Roman, and the clubs decided that they was going to change the logo, and they did, with a Brigantian warrior,
Mhm.
who is the Brigantes being the original tribe was on this land, the original tribal
Wow.
land, and said, well, if we're named after the warriors of the people here, then it should be a indigenous person representing and not someone from Rome like a million miles away. So I
Yeah.
was really impressed that I'm seeing a lot of this decolonizing in ideas everywhere recently. I think people are taking it very seriously now, which is
Yeah.
great because it's about preserving history. And I don't think a lot of local people even knew that was what this land was. It was a Brigantian tribal land before we
Mhm.
were invaded by the Normans.
Yeah.
And I just really love that they honoured that. Although I still sort of had some questions about the depiction of the warrior because I felt like it wasn't very accurate. It felt slightly Nordic in its appearance, but at least they're trying, I guess.
Hmm.
You mentioned about the possession work, and I really wanted to ask you about that because you were probably one of the first people who I became aware of who was very openly discussing the topic.
Hmm.
Everyone sort of used these euphemisms, like you said, like drawing down the moon, and it was
Hmm.
sort of this thing that was talked about, but not really described in the honest way of being actual possession work. And I think you were the first person I ever came across who just out and out used the word possession
Hmm.
and had no apology about that. And it's been something that you've taught in your books, it's something that
Hmm.
you've taught in classes. I'm
Hmm.
sure it's part of your Wildwood
Yeah,
tradition.
totally.
And why is that something that is so important to you that you've included it in a lot of your teachings?
Mm. Well, because oh my God, I could talk about transpossession forever, but but because it is for me an ecstatic communion, an intimate ecstatic communion with the mystery. There is no For me, there is no more sensuously visceral, alive way to do it. Like literally, we are, calling the spirits or the ancestors or the gods into our beings. And some people, when I'm teaching this work, they ask me why would they want to do that, and I say what a lot of other people have also said, not just me, is that the great ones, the gods, the spirits, they have bodies, but they have different kinds of bodies. We have these dense bodies that we can eat and have sex through and like enjoy things in this really dense Middle Earth way. And it's very unique. And traditionally, in many cultures, the gods envy us for it. They envy us for our heartbreak, for our love, for our sex, for our desire. And so when they come into us and we carry them and they carry us, I use the term vessels. When we open as a vessel to these beings, they also are getting a great deal out of it, as much as we are and the human community is from being able to witness very intense, real transformations in somebody's voice, height, face, light. I have seen a lot of possession. I think probably more than a lot of people. I've seen generally beautiful, stunning, awe-inspiring transpossession, and I've seen some not so good transpossession where you end up having to, really get that thing out of there. But in general, the arts of transpossession, I feel, are actually really helpful to human communities. I believe that all primary cultures have mediumship and transpossession in one way or another. And when you have it at the heart of your community, like we do in Bali or like they do in Haiti and different forms of Brazilian spiritist traditions, like they used to in Scandinavian countries, like they probably used to everywhere, it is a catalyst for the psychic wholeness and hygiene of human communities because it reminds those human communities that they are in deep intimate relationship with the ancestors and the spirits of the land and the gods, and that they can move through and with us, that they can guide and inspire us, that they are very, very real. And it the facilitation of transpossession actually teaches me and others like me more about boundaries and finesse than not doing it. So you can learn a lot about where you begin and end through that art. You can learn a lot about what the nature of the gods even is through having them within you. And there are different levels and different states of kind of co-consciousness that you can also cultivate, which today we call things like mantling, aspecting, things like that, which I also teach. Um, I think it's honestly some of the best work that witches can do. And I also want to say that there are two other people who really, really go there and who do talk about it, and that's Janet Ferrer and Gavin Bone, and they also travel the world teaching that, or they used to. And I think they like to use the terms trance prophecy, but they also talk about possession. And I know that for Janet and Gavin, or Janet more specifically, it came from her original experiences in an Alexandrian coven, and then she, adapted it and changed it and learnt from other sources.
Yeah, I agree with you. So much of, if you look at cultures, the words they have that would be our closest parallel to the word witch, it usually contains somewhere in its linguistics the idea of somebody who would be possessed by some god or
Yeah.
spirit. And yet I find it so bizarre that witches almost get really shy around the topic.
Yeah.
Around the subject of Janet and Gavin, you actually wrote an entry for this chapter 2 of
Mhm.
the book, Lifting the Veil.
Yeah.
I was so happy that you were one of the contributors in that when I saw it. I remember reading that and then getting to your bit, and I was like, yay, because I feel like, as I said, you were probably the first person I ever became aware who was actually not scared of using the word
Mm.
possession and really talking about it in a very honest way. And some of my best experiences in the craft have either been through possession work for myself or being in the presence of
Mm.
somebody who, like you
Yeah.
said, one of those really good experience possessions, and
Mm.
the things that I would not change for the world.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking of God's possession, things of that nature, you have a very special bond, which I will let you elaborate on, with the goddess Persephone.
Mhm.
You mentioned in your book a great experience, that first experience that you have with her, and she's not a goddess that I actually feel like gets a lot of mention at all, and she's a
Weirdly.
very beautiful goddess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could you tell us a bit about your relationship with Persephone?
Yeah, you're right. It's weird that she's not talked about a lot. Um, I have some theories, but I don't know if I can go into them. But look, she appeared to me, literally appeared to me in the middle of my mother's kitchen when I was calling, back then I would have just been calling the goddess into my ritual circle. And I didn't really have any training at that time, and I didn't really know who I was calling. I had a strong felt sense of like, I did have a strong felt sense of a powerful feminine presence whenever I called the goddess, and I associated her with the moon, as a lot of the books kind of told me to. But definitely, that was a thing, and she just appeared. The full moonlight came through the window. She sculpted herself out of the light, which took my breath away and made all of the hair on my body stand up. I've seen her a few more times like that, like right in front of me like that, but only a few. Um, to see the gods like that is always a lot. Life affirming, life changing. My relationship with her is very mysterious, like I dedicated myself to her as her dedicant priestess, like priestess, like 20 years ago. And I I did that after a year of relating with her, because I knew that I needed to relate with her for at least a year before I could do that. Um, I just knew that that was true. She's behind and inside of everything I do. I don't know always where I end and she begins. So I ended up coining a term which I talk about in ecstatic witchcraft, which is the term soul goddess or soul deity or soul god, because I knew of other terms, like I knew of the term patron, but that didn't cut it for me. Like I was like, that's not what I mean. And I knew of terms from Lakumi and Ifa, like the master of the head or the crowning Orisha, but I'm not connected to those traditions in any real way, so I can't use those terms. So I just had to make one up. And but that's she's the one who's like that with me. And I really feel like I've served her in many lifetimes. Like that's how I feel. I have memories of that. Um, she's also probably the most silent of all the great ones that I work with because she's just always there. Like all the others are louder and more intense in my life in some ways, like, but she's just silent. That's actually kind of a quality of her, actually, is that she's still and silent. Like the Persephone I know is the Persephone of the mysteries, of the Eleusinian mysteries, and this dreadful goddess, who of course is also Kore of the spring, but she's, you know, she's the queen of the underworld. And back then they didn't want to say her name, so they would say the maid, Kore, just like they didn't want to say the name of her husband, so they would say other names. And I think, you know, I think maybe that's potentially why people don't like to bring her up a lot. I mean, people bring up that story a lot of her abduction and the descent of, you know, her, well, do we, you know, I guess you could say it is a descent story, but in the Homeric hymn she's taken. um yeah, maybe people are afraid of that story. I mean, it's a very intense story, but it also lays it lays some of the groundwork of how those peoples looked at her, Demeter, Hecate, even. um those three appear in that story. It also is a story of wild grief. Like that is a story of grief, and it's a story of love because Persephone and her husband love each other. Like it's like quite profound. So it's a wild story.
Yeah, very true. You actually had a lot in your book that you actually mentioned something in your book, and it really struck me because of a memory from when I was a teenager, and I thought, damn, why am I only making this connection now when I'm reading the book? I think it was like last year. I hit the point, um, and you was talking about how we all have stories that we will tell over and over and over again, but sometimes we miss out details and
Mm-hmm.
things that are important. And suddenly, as I was reading the first part of that, I instantly thought of a story. And then when I got to the line where you said about we forget details, something really profound hit me. I mean, I can't tell the story because it would take too much of this up, but suffice to say, though, it was an encounter with Hecate, and I realized just how close I was to a crossroads, and it only just struck me when I was reading
Mm,
those lines. And I thought, I've told this story so many times, I could describe this location to you in great detail, and it never occurred to me I'm literally just a stone's throw away from the crossroads.
yeah.
And I just thought that that's so bizarre, and it is strange, those details that do pass you by until you really reflect on something and don't just tell the story almost mechanically. So I'm very grateful for that inclusion in your book because I would never have even made that realization had I not read those words.
Yeah.
Um, and she's a goddess that for me is very quiet, likewise,
Mm,
until she needs to say something really profound, and then she doesn't shout. I don't experience it. I think some people really describe her in this really like maniacal kind of way. And I just find that she's just very to the point. If she has
yeah.
something to say, she'll just push me in a direction and then lead me to it.
Yeah.
But that one was a life saving, literally a life saving encounter. She very quickly came in, told me I was in danger, and then I responded. And it was just strange that it was a crossroads, and I'd never realized that before.
Yeah.
So crazy. It is crazy how they interact, and like you said, those ones that you feel are tied to your soul. Like you said, I
Mhm.
think the term soul, God, goddess, deity is a perfect word. And like you said, we don't have words that are sort of really appropriate. I've never connected with the patron matron thing. I
Mm.
always feel it feels a bit like the Catholic saints
Mhm.
more than deity.
Yeah.
So I really resonated with that philosophy, both in ecstatic witchcraft and then again in Which
Mm.
Belongs to the World. So I'm going to transition very quickly to the quick fire questions that I
Mhm.
have. So we discussed these before we started. So these are just quick questions. It's just one answer, and no explanation needed. It's just a exercise that I like to do with every guest. So the same questions for everybody and very random. I'm kind of random too, though, so it makes sense. So the first one is text or talk,
Talk.
tea or coffee,
Coffee.
invisibility or mind reading,
Mind reading.
McDonald's or KFC.
I mean, I can't eat it. Like, I'm vegetarian.
So neither. Great answer. Neither.
Neither. Yeah.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Charmed.
Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
And then what's your favorite season?
Ooh, autumn.
Favorite color?
Green.
Favorite song?
Whitney Houston Dance with Somebody.
That's a good choice. Favorite book?
Did you say book?
Your book, yeah.
Oh, uh, um, okay, the one that's coming to mind is Phyllis Curot's Book of Shadows.
I like that. I like that. That's a good. I've been rereading that one recently. And your favorite film?
Recently, All of Us Strangers.
I'm yet to watch that, so I will have to move it up on my to watch list just because you've mentioned it now.
It's so good.
So we're moving into talking about your book, The Witch Belongs to the World. Can we have a look at your
Mhm.
book, please?
Yeah, my very beautiful book.
It is. It is
Yeah.
truly a stunning book. The problem is every guest I've had on so far has had to hold up the book because I only have digital copies of the books. I need to
Yeah.
start having guests on where I can physically go like
And
this
it,
myself.
and it
Um,
has like gorgeous black and white photography. It's really beautiful.
it really does. What was the inspiration for this book and why now?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so the inspiration was I knew it was inside of me since 2017. It kept changing its form. Um, in 2017, it had the title, and I think I mentioned it in the book somewhere. It had the title "Fire in the Heart: A Witch's Book of Revolution," and it was very Aradian, which is synchronistic now that I'm talking to you, as someone who's written a whole book on the gospel. But yeah, it was very Aradian, and then I still feel like the spirit of Aradia is in the book. But I guess the inspiration for the book is I just needed to like basically I hadn't written a book on my own in a decade. I'd written books with my beloved friend Jane Meredith, who's an amazing author, and I love her very dearly, but we also have very different forms of magic. And I really hadn't written a book on my own in a decade. And I wanted to like express to the magical world, this is this is my craft, this is it. Like, obviously I'll continue to grow and deepen, but this is the distillation of my ethos. This is a book about witches. This is a love spell to the craft. Who I love the craft so much. I spend most of my time thinking about it. I spend I mean, I'm a complete nerd for it, but not just like a nerd. I'm a complete devotee of it. It's how I think and feel and dream, and I like sometimes so much so that I can't, I can't even tell that, I'm not, it's just who I am, right? And so I just wanted to like get that out there, and I think like some authors, maybe a minority of witchcraft and occult authors, I teach a lot. So I'm out there traveling and I teach workshops and intensives, and I also teach privately, in initiatory traditions, but I do teach out there in the world. And I wanted to kind of capture some of what I've learned from all of that and present it in this book. and I knew I wanted it to be more of like a spell. Like I think a lot of us think of our books as spells, but I really didn't want the exercises to be listed by any kind of like structured system. Like I was talking to my editor and I was like, I don't want it to look like that. I don't want the exercises to even seem like exercises. I want it to be one seamless spell. And then she actually suggested, why not use black and white photography from my friend who she had seen take photos of me doing rituals, and he's a Wildwood witch and an amazing photographer, and he's taken photos of me doing like full on ritual. And I said, yeah, let's do that. That's a great idea. So that's kind of some of why this book now. And I just was coming up, like, I started writing it in 2021. Yeah, 2021. And I just need it just needed to come out of me. I couldn't have it in me any longer. And my astrologer who was reading for me, she often does my yearly kind of like, you know, transits and progressions and things. And she said, you have a book. If you don't write it now, you'll never write it. And I was like, so so I wrote it.
It is a great book, and like you said, those exercises are in there seamlessly. They really are. You're almost reading and don't even realize, and then you almost go, "Oh, this is something I have to do now." Yeah, and I really loved that the subtitle, "Spell of Becoming," because I felt what you said. It was one continuous spell, and there was something that I thought the other day actually when I was reflecting back on it, and I thought one thing that's a testament to it, but slightly annoying from an author perspective, is it is a book that you need to take your time with. It's
Yes.
not a book you can just plow through, have a review. It's
Yeah.
like that. It's a time, it's a process, but so is a spell.
Yeah.
And I think the way that the chapters flow from each other, they don't very obviously build on each other,
Mhm.
but they do. And I
Mhm.
think if you just read them back to back, you
Yeah.
wouldn't even notice that. But if
Yeah.
you take your time with it, I think you can see the unfolding of the entire process. And
Mhm.
it is beautifully done. It really is. I don't know anybody else who has ever written a book in quite that way. So that is quite an accomplishment for you too, to write something that's both informative but then also has that fluid structure going through it. It
Mhm.
was just beautiful. It really was. And then the illustrations in between, it just made everything. It was so. It's an experience. It's not just a book. It is an experience. That's the only way I can put it into words.
Mm.
You did such an amazing job with it. You really did.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Have you found that other yeah, have you found that other people have had to really take their time with it? I mean, I
Yeah.
know that's my perspective, but I imagine that everybody's probably had the same.
I mean, everyone, like, and it is frustrating as an author because it's like I want to, I want to know how it was, but because I wrote it in this way where I even say between chapters, stop, think, feel, reflect. Like you might do this for a month, like that's how it had to happen. My mother, who reads all my books, she's not a witch, but she is an amazing woman. She's 70 next year. She read the book over a period of months, and after she finished it, she was like, "Fio, I'm sorry it took me this long, but you told you I had to go really slow, and it was just so precious and beautiful and magical." And it's like I think that's the best feedback is from my mother, even you know, even though she's not a witch in that. I mean, she could easily be one if she wanted to be, you know what I mean? But she's not. And she like hearing that from her was very precious to me. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. My mum's also my reader. I'm like I don't let anything go to anybody without her seeing it first.
Mm,
Tell me how it reads. Do you like it? I know I'll get an honest feedback too. I think that's one of the things, you know, we can always depend on our mothers in that respect. They'll always be honest with us. They'll never let us put out something
that's
stupid.
true. That's true.
One thing that I really did, yeah, one thing I really did appreciate in your book, and it made me smile every time I got to it, because I felt like if we was having a conversation together, almost in the which you do conversational writing very well. Something that I kind of miss smiling and nodding at was every time you used a very particular word, which was power. And that's another word that I think people recently have become very frightened of using. And I'm like, the whole point of witchcraft, and you actually said this, you say if we're honest, witchcraft is a big power. And I just I grinned when I read that part because I was like, yes, it is. And I don't know why people are so necessarily frightened of admitting that there's power in the craft, or there should be. If it's not powerful, then I don't see why I would be doing it or anybody else would be doing it. And I really love that you included a whole section on that while also talking about the subjects of curses. But you did
Mhm.
it so well. Would you
Thank you.
tell us your feelings on power in witchcraft?
Oh, power and witchcraft. It's yes, I mean, I know there are other people who write about this too. Look, I feel, there are witches who talk about raising energy, and I know that energy is a very kind of useful, kind of euphemistic term because it can kind of mean anything. But it's not a word I like because I think that witches raise power. Um, and I feel like, yeah, witchcraft is about many things. It is about power. I think that power is deeply twisted and demonized and really screwed with in the world. I think Starhawk, who is an amazing witch, uh, articulated it best decades ago when she said that power is either power over, power from within, or power with. And so she was talking about, and that has deeply influenced me. And she's talking about coercive, dominating power that we are very familiar with in this world. She's talking about the power that is latent within us, our divine kind of authority, sovereignty that rises from within, that witches know very well. And she's talking about a power that we cultivate with one another, with the earth, with the wind, with the spirits, and maybe sometimes even with positionality or privilege. And so she's also very careful about power with, like, someone might have charisma, or someone might have leadership power, or power with whoever their father is, for instance. um but I think of power as something to be cultivated. If you're not interested in becoming empowered, if you're not interested in wielding power, you have no you're not going to last long in the craft at all. And then there's this other thing, Victor Anderson. I'm also an initiate of the Anderson Feri tradition, and so we often Feri initiates often quote Victor and Cora a lot. They said many wise things. One of the wise things that Victor said was, when you get confused about power, remember love. So he linked these things inextricably together. Power is also one of the points of the iron pentagram, or the iron pentacle as it is most often called now. And in the original order, that's sex, self, passion, pride, power. So it culminates in power. And so that was a teaching that he would give to people as a way to even see if they could handle it. Like, he would ask people to repeat those 5 words 3 times. Many people back in the 50s and 60s could not repeat those words because, number one, they sound like the 7 deadly sins, and to a lot of people who has still got a lot of complexes, they can't say those words, they can't own those words. And then the other thing is that they are a current, that the iron pentagram is a current of power. It's an initiatory transformative current of power. And so they'd start to say, sex, self, passion, and they'd freak out, and they'd stop, and then they'd leave. And so really that was his clue. These people can't deal with their own power, then they can't have the craft, you know. So because ultimately, if you can't deal with your own power, there's no point, like, how are you going to dare to invoke a goddess? How are you going to negotiate with the ancestors? How are you going to cast a spell which will change the fabric of reality? How are you going to do any of that? So it is the foundation of what we do.
Yeah, you summed that up perfectly, particularly with the exercise of repeating the words of the Iron Pentacle,
Yeah.
because um, it reminded me of something that I've said a few years ago. I said it quite a lot a few years ago, which was that I felt like a good chunk of modern witchcraft, they would make fantastic Puritans
Yeah.
because they're frightened of these things that are just hangovers from the church. They are, like you said, they see them as the seven deadly sins.
Mm,
And it's like, I don't see why people shackle themselves to this thing they don't even belong to anymore.
mm, yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy to me. But I think that's a great exercise for everybody to do, probably to see where they have those conditions still in place. So
Yeah,
I really
I
like
mean
that. Thank you for
that's
sharing
what
that.
it's for. That's what he taught it for. He taught it as a purification of complexes.
I really do prefer that because obviously the reciting the Lord's Prayer backwards is very popular.
Mhm.
My only ever criticism of that was I wondered, was it still leaning into a Christian narrative because it was something the Catholic Church used to
Sure.
say was done. So I actually prefer this idea. I'm going to actually start referencing that to people as an
I
alternative because I think that's a great.
I think Victor preferred it too because he actually, Cora, up until her death, was a Christian. Like she was one of those actual dual faith people who was fully a Christian and a witch, and it never contradicted for her. Like she was an Appalachian poor from a poor family woman, you know, and the earliest references we have of Victor writing about witchcraft predate 1954 when Witchcraft Today came out. We have a reference in a psychic magazine. I think it's 1945 or 1946, where it's printed in one of the books about him, and it has his address in Bend, Oregon, and all of that. It has the date, and and he talks about the how he is a Christian, but in the letter he talks about never wanting to be associated with any anti-sex cults, and he talks about the sweet old nature teachings, and he talks about astral and etheric kind of counterparts to the dense body, which was, so we know that that was consistent for him since the mid 40s and probably earlier, because we also know that he was initiated in 1932 into a particular coven in Oregon, which was interestingly headed by a man and a woman who were deeply involved in a church, because at that time you had to be, you could not at all in the 1930s USA, or in the 1930s as New Forest, you could not be associated with Satanism, witchcraft, whatever. What you couldn't. It was not a good idea. I don't think a lot of people realize realize that now. Um, Especially in English speaking nations. But there are also people still accused of sorcery and witchcraft in the world today, and who are killed. So we have to be vigilant about a lot of things, including that there are forces and systems of power that deeply hate witches, and that are not a fan of things like women's power and sovereignty of women and queer people, indigenous people, and all of these things are somehow linked together in the colonial mind. Like any magic or ceremony that indigenous people do is immediately devil worship. Their languages are devil worship. They must be banned. I mean, up until I think very recently, wasn't it? The Welsh language was banned, and you would be hit in school for speaking it. So it's just this sense of power that comes up from the earth and that distinguishes you as connected to your culture and your land. These are sources of power, and they're sources of strength as well for different witches.
Yeah, that's so very true. I think, like you said as well about the tying together of things like witchcraft, women's power. I was actually having a conversation with somebody about this the other day, and it was interesting where something was pointed out to me, and I thought, oh, I hadn't even considered that, which was in the witch trials in Iceland, the majority of the victims were men.
Yeah.
And the reason being is because magic was automatically seen as a women's thing. And so in a way it wasn't, they applied it in a different way. They sort of saw it as, well, that's what women do. But if
Mm.
he was a man, then you was breaking the social norm, you was transgressing. So the thing became about transgressing gender roles more than it
Yeah.
was about power. And I thought that was really bizarre, that it was almost, well, women can have this power, but as a man you are entitled to also wield this power along with the societal power that you have,
Yeah.
because then you're almost having more power. And I thought that was really an interesting point, where different cultures interpret that same message, but they apply
Mhm.
it in different ways. And it's true. There's even, I think a lot of people miss the fact that, like you said, there's even cultures, countries where, like today, we would not survive
Mm.
being open as witches. It
Mm.
would just not be a thing. And I think people often think of it as the past. And
Mm.
it's important that we know our current history as well as our past history.
Yeah.
You do that really well in the book as well, though. You actually touch on a lot of historical points, references. We do read very similar sources, so it's interesting the materials that you used, particularly the references to a radio. I did notice, even if you didn't outright state it, I did notice that in the book. It
Mhm.
was very much there, and I definitely appreciated it. Because I think it's something that we don't often, we all know it, we sort of all know about the book, but we never really celebrate the ideas and think we can have that today,
Yeah.
and we should have it today. The power, the breaking the social norms,
Yeah.
not being confined by gender roles
Mhm.
and social class and things like that.
Mhm.
And it was so important. And I think yeah, you wrote that book so well. I really can't verbalize how much I really appreciate that book. I
Mm.
really did.
Thank you.
You had so many pictures in the book. Do you have a favorite one?
You know, I think my favorite is the one of the ones at the back that they chose to go with my like bio. And they chose where all of these photos went, and they also chose, I had nothing to do with what photos were chosen between Luke and Llewellyn. I had no idea what was going to happen. Um and my favorite photo, I'll hold it up in a moment, is this one, which was taken on my 30th birthday on the Hill of the Witch, or Slieve na Cailleach, in Ireland in County Meath. And so this this and I love it because I'm in deep trance. I'm on this ancient hill, which I had been to several times before. Um, and it's my 30th birthday. I went there with nine people. I was one of the nine, but there were nine of us that just so happened to be there, my mother and eight witches, including myself. And we did ritual and magic, and it was profound. That's what I wanted. I was like, for my 30th birthday, I want to be in Ireland. I want to be on the Hill of the Witch, and I want to do a lot of magic. That's just what I wanted, you know. Um, and I was in deep, deep trance, communing with the ancestors, in that. And Luke, who's brilliant at capturing that respectfully, I wouldn't have even known that he was there doing it. Like, so he's able to capture things without me noticing. So that helps me not worry about it.
That's great. You said that it was something that you thought you wanted to do. Obviously, it's something that I see the rationale for wanting to go, but why was that the thing for your birthday specifically? Why was it something of, I'm going to fly into a different hemisphere to go to this particular hill? Why that spot?
Well, I did a number of other things too, but so that was part of a longer trip, obviously. So I went to Amsterdam where there are Wildwood witches, and I wanted to be there for the first Wildwood initiations in Amsterdam, which I got to be there for, which was very profound. And then I went, and my fairy initiation happened weeks before I turned 30 in Somerset. So I also flew to become initiated into the Anderson Feri tradition in Somerset. And one of my initiators flew from the west coast of the US, and one of my initiators lives in Somerset. And then my mum came too. She wanted to come. We drove up with my boyfriend at the time and one of my best friends. We went up to Loch Ness and we camped because my boyfriend at the time, he's obsessed with like crypto zoology. So so he was like, I need to camp on the side of Loch Ness, and I was like, sure, that sounds fun. So we did that, and then Ireland, we went to Dublin. I like Dublin. It's not my favorite part of Ireland, but I've been there before and enjoyed it. And then we went and visited a friend of mine. We did, yeah, look, the Hill of the Witch is, but it all culminated at the Hill of the Witch, which is for me, when I first encountered it in 2008, I I didn't mean to encounter it. We didn't know where we were going. This farmer said, who we later discovered owned all of that land, was like, you might want to go up to the Hill of the Witch. And it was just perfect. And when we found it, we were just, and no one else was there. And we just got to be weirdo witches while no other living human was present. And so that, and then the second time I went was with Gavin Bone in 2010, and he and Janet, I was part of this like sacred sites tour, and he and Janet were very instrumental in that. Yeah. So that's why. Yeah.
I love that. One of the things that I really love about Ireland in particular is, although they're like a really strongly Christian, like between Catholic and Protestant country, they're really open to witches. They really appreciate
Totally.
the witches, and particularly the farmers. The farmers love the witches because they help them out when they got a problem with their land or their livestock. They're like, yeah, I'll just go and see a witch.
That's true.
And
They
that's one thing I
do.
really appreciate about Ireland.
Yeah. They appreciate
Yeah, we
witches.
don't.
They do.
Yeah, we have that here, but not so much with our farmers because we're not really close to farms.
Mm.
Well, I say that actually, there is a farm like literally just round the corner from me. It's like literally just like about a 2 minute walk away. But
Mm.
yeah, it's so strange that you get these little pockets across different countries where like witches are just really appreciated still, and then you've got
Yeah.
other places where it's just not appreciated at all.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's really nice to be in
What's it
Ireland.
like where you live?
Where I live in the city of Sydney, either people don't know that witches exist, or some, yeah, I'm sure a lot of people here think we're evil and diabolical. And then a lot of people know we do exist and they seek us out. Totally. I mean, Sydney is a very queer city, and a lot of, interestingly, there's a lot of, like, when you're in the queer community, like the especially the queer artist community long enough, you meet a lot of witches. So we're around, and people, people will come to us for like spells and readings. It's quite common, really. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a mixed bag then, isn't it? Then
Yeah,
it sounds like so you've got a bit of everybody there.
totally. And I like I don't know, like, because we're still part of the Commonwealth, and a lot of people still think of themselves as part of that, and they have that cultural zeitgeist. They also have that either Protestant or Catholic background. And a lot of Australians, though, we often think of ourselves sociologically as very lazy about religion. Of course, my background was very different. Like a lot of people who are not born here and are not really from here, like myself in a way, although my mother's family has been here for at least 4 generations. But we there's a distinct difference between, I guess, migrant populations who are often very religious, and or committed to their cultural distinctions and their cultural pride, and you're kind of like everyday, kind of like they would call themselves like Anglo-Celtic. I don't know if you hear that term in Britain a lot, but here, a
No,
lot
I
of
don't.
white Australians call themselves Anglo-Celtic. And my one of my ex-partners used to say that all the time, and I would look at him. He's a very smart person, PhD scholar, witch, and I would look at him and be like, "Do you know what that means?" Like you need to not say Anglo-Celtic so often because it's just, and a lot of white politicians here say because of our Anglo-Celtic heritage, and they just whip it out, and I'm like, do they know what that means? Like it's almost like they use it to mean, I don't know. Actually, I don't know what they mean by it. I know what it means to me as a witch who draws from Anglo-Celtic threads of influence. But like when I hear that, I'm like, I don't know if they know what they're talking about. Like, I really don't think they know what they're saying, or what the word Anglo
I
even
have
means, or who are the Angles and who are the Saxons. Like, I don't think they get it.
I have never ever heard that term in my life. I mean, I'm sort of, I think to a point, I'm probably grateful if it's something that politicians are using.
They
Because
use it a
politicians,
lot.
let's face it, yeah, one thing about politicians quite universally in any country is they're never great, are they? Nothing they
No,
say is
that's
ever
right.
great.
That's right.
That's crazy. Um, so we mentioned about your favorite picture. Now, I spoke to you at the beginning and mentioned a picture that I quite liked, and I said there was a
Yes.
story connected to it. Would you be willing to share that story with us,
Yeah,
please?
sorry, I
I
just need
really
to.
liked this.
Yeah, so it's this one,
Yeah,
right?
it was.
It's this one.
It was, yeah, yeah. It
Yeah.
just really spoke to me, and I wasn't sure why.
Yes. So I'm also, I don't know if you can tell, but in the other thing I'm holding in my hand, and actually this was taken, this image, this photo was taken exactly in the same ritual that this photo was taken in.
Okay,
So what happened was I said to Luke, Luke and I lived together for a little bit in 2018, 2019, and a storm was rolling in, and he was like, let's go take photos of you doing magic. And I was like, okay. And we both had nothing to do, and so we ran out to a park near the house. He still lives there, but near the house I was staying with him at. And I took my gourd rattle, my crossed keys, which I use for very specific things, and I took the knife from the Coven of the Wildwood that is kind of no particular witch of the Wildwood owns it. It's just like a very particular important knife. And I took that. And I did a very particular ritual, and I invoked very specific angelic spirits. Um, and that's what we were doing. And the storm just got really intense. And as usual, when you're doing magic, the wind like whips up at all the right times, and birds do things at all the right time. Like it was giving all of that. It was giving all of that. Um, and it was just very powerful. And then we both, you got like, I got saturated in water. Like it was amazing. It was an amazing ritual. And I'm kind of glad this was actually not my choice for the cover. My choice for the cover was this other another forest scene that Luke had taken. And I didn't even realize I was in the photo, but very far into the forest. It was I can't remember the type of tree it was. Maybe it was a beech forest. It was just outside of the Hill of the Witch, actually, just down from the Hill of the Witch. And like you can barely see me in it, which is why I liked it, and I really wanted that to be the cover. But then they went with this, which I think is striking, and I think it's very. I think that ritual that I did with Luke, it somehow created this book. Like I really like I really think that was the moment that created this book, and then one of the photos from that ritual is on the cover. So yeah.
Well, I'm really glad I asked that question then, because what a great photograph to pick, the one that
Yeah.
created the book.
Yeah.
I love that. I really do. The picture that you said you wanted on the cover, that is in the book, isn't it? I
Oh,
think I know
actually,
which.
I actually think it
I
is. I
think
think
it
you're right.
is
Yeah.
because I actually recall seeing a photo like that. I mean, whether it's the exact same picture, I don't know, but there was definitely a forest scene.
I think you're completely correct. I think it's in here
I think it was in
somewhere.
the latter half of the book.
Well, anyway, I'll have to look for it later because it's actually a really gorgeous photo in general. Oh, I found it. I found it. Yeah, it's this one.
Yeah.
And somewhere in there, I think I exist. I don't know. Maybe I don't actually. The more I look at it, I'm like, no, I don't think I do. And maybe that's why I liked it. Maybe that's why I liked it. But it was definitely that forest. Yeah.
Yeah, I see why it was a picture that you would have wanted on the cover, though it is a very striking photo, and it
Mm.
speaks a lot of the type of things that you mention in the book, where
Yes.
you connect with the land, the spirits, that are just ethereal, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
quality. It's very much captured in that image. It really is.
Yeah.
Very quickly, though, we are talking, or I want to talk to you at least about, you have another book being re-released. It's a
Hmm.
book that's already been out, Ecstatic Witchcraft. We mentioned it a few times.
Hmm.
What are the changes in that? There's been, I will quickly say for the viewers, it's going to be released with Crosscrow Books
Hmm.
this time. It was originally with Llewellyn, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I know it's got a new cover, which is very intriguing, but
It's
what's
so
different
good.
about the inside? I know there are differences.
Yeah. So the more I was editing this book, the more changes there were. In fact, I even took some I so for people who have their original Llewellyn books, keep them because because there are things I took out. I'm not going to even say what they are. Like there is one thing in particular that I completely removed. And if you have the original edition, good for you, you'll figure it out. And then maybe you'll figure out why it's removed. But then other than that, I got to really reflect on a lot of things. Like, obviously the term shamanic, which it's so the term so the subtitle is magic, trance, and philosophy in the shamanic craft. I didn't change that because I still use that term, but I went deeper in, like in the is it a revised introduction or foreword? I can't remember, but I went deeper into a reflection on why I still use the term, what historically what it's connected to. I did that in the book anyway, but I do it more. There are also some terms in there that I seemed to use back then that 10, 12 years later, I just don't use. One of those terms is totem. And but instead of just deleting it from the book, I didn't do that. I just added like addendums. I said, look, I don't use this term anymore. This is a term that I know that a lot of Indigenous people use. This is where it comes from. This is the group of people it comes from. Lots of Indigenous nations all around the world use it. Um, and that's an interesting phenomenon, like the idea of like the academic conceptualization of, for instance, an Ojibwe word, and then how it's like fed kind of back through academia, sociology, anthropology, and how maybe native or indigenous peoples who are themselves in academia will take those terms and use them for their own purposes. I talked about that phenomenon. I talked about how the word shaman is used by people, by indigenous peoples far away from the Tungus speaking peoples of that kind of so-called Siberian region where it comes from. And even before, like the word shaman as we know it in English is actually a Russian word based on that word. So Russians first created the term to talk about, or the Russian speakers, let's say that Russian speakers created that term, shaman, and then I think Mircea Eliade he made it really famous. Um, and then this idea that all of these different kind of groups of people might be practicing something shamanistic. Essentially, I'm not the first person to argue that witchcraft is shamanistic. I think it is, but I do make a point in the in my new foreword where I say maybe not all modern witches are shamanistic, and I make that point. um, but obviously, that's a term I still use. I talked about I talked about soul gods a little bit more in there. I had to take out some stuff simply because it made no sense anymore. But that was actually really minimal. Like I had to change some references because when I wrote that book, I had just started studying fairy. And so in the original book, I say something like, I very occasionally you'll see references to fairy, and this is why. But now I have been a fairy initiate for several years, nearly 7 years, and I have initiated someone in that tradition. It's a very different vantage point. Um, and I also include different appendices. There are 3 new appendices. One expands on trance possession, one and includes new techniques. Well, techniques that I've been teaching for over a decade, but I did not include in that book. Um, and it includes an appendix about a particular type of sorcery that I used to teach called Medean sorcery, which is inspired by Medea, the witch goddess or the witch sorceress Medea. And there's another appendix that I cannot remember what it is. But essentially there is new material. There is thoughtful, kind of hopefully thoughtful reflections and provocations to myself, to history, to anthropology. And there's a foreword by Kenneth Johnson, who, by the way, so so that blows my mind because Kenneth Johnson, his book Witchcraft and the Shamanic Journey, I read when I was in high school. I just found it at a secondhand bookstore, and it had that Llewellyn cover which was really cute, with like kind of like blue gray like specters like riding in the wild hunt or something. And I saw this book, Witchcraft and the Shamanic Journey. And when there's certain books that I used to see back in the day. Like I had this with a particular Persephone book that dropped off the shelf. It's one of the few books in my life that has actually just dropped off the shelf. But this Witchcraft and the Shamanic Journey, when I saw it, like my heart fell out of my face. Like there was something about this book, and I knew it was a key for me. And the fact that he's writing a foreword for the book is like mind blowing to me, because he actually is responsible for me understanding that context. It's really his book, Witchcraft and the Shamanic Journey, which Cross Crow Books reprinted in a new form. I have it somewhere in my house. Brilliant, utterly brilliant. And that is an underrated book. A lot of people don't even know that book exists. And I'm like, go and read that book. Yeah.
You're right. It is such an underrated book, and I really love the Crosscrow Box cover of it. That's another image that just speaks to me on some level. But it's an underrated book, and you're right. I don't know how people have never come across it. I don't know. I mean, I guess if people are new, but I think people who've been doing this for a very long time,
Yeah.
I don't know how they've not come across it. Like you said, it is a very underrated book. I'm definitely going to be excited to get my hands on a copy of Ecstatic Witchcraft and then compare it back to the original now, just to see what the differences are. I'm really interested. Do you know when that's being released? What the release date is for the edition?
Yeah, it's August this year. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's August for Ecstatic Witchcraft, and then you can go and buy The Witch Belongs to the World right now.
Yeah.
So where can people contact you or connect with you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, they can find me on Instagram. I don't take Instagram very seriously. Like I'm one of those people who's like kind of half using it to try to be like good about my profession and writing, and half just like whatever, like just like being my complete honest self, which is, I don't know if that works for everyone, but it certainly works for me because like my life is just so braided in that way. So there's definitely Instagram, Fio Gede Parma there, and then also same website. I'm an okay blogger. Occasionally I go through phases where I blog several times a month. But yeah, like on my blog, there's entire essays about entire things like the compass or the devil or reflections on blah blah. Like I'm a pretty nostalgic person. I like to reflect a lot, so there's a lot of reflections. And there's also like I have links to like other podcasts and my services and things like that. And I also have a YouTube channel where I have a lot of free classes. Actually, I have free Iron Pentacle meditations with my friend Jane Meredith. I have several free classes on the Triple Soul and on the Witch's Compass and the Witch's Crossroads and the Witch's Circle, and on relating to the great ones or the deities, like just stuff that's just there for people to take in if they want it. Yeah.
That's great. I'll make sure that all of that goes into the video description so that people can find you easily. So thank you so much for joining me. Again, I really appreciate you working with the completely different hemispheres, time differences. I think for your time, for your work, for the just everything. I'm just very grateful that you came on today, that you've given so much, and I've really appreciated speaking with you. Really, I really have. I took a lot from even just this.
Oh, thank you so much. Yay. Yay.